Joining me now is Lindsay Ellefson. She's a media writer for The Wrap, and she's written an article about Breitbart and how they're not doing so well. So, of course, I'd love to talk to her about that. Lindsay, welcome to the Young Turks.
Hi.
Hey, although funny enough, I actually have mixed feelings about this phenomenon. So I want to talk to you about digital media in general, but let's start with the article you wrote about Breitbart. So how much trouble are they in?
In the piece that I wrote, we found out that their traffic declined 72% since January of 2017. So that was around the inauguration. They had great traffic numbers, and it has declined 72% until June, which is the month that we have the most recent numbers for.
That's devastating. But they have a second issue as well, which is revenue specifically coming from advertising. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, they had a huge advertiser boycott in 2017. A lot of people remember it as being pretty catastrophic for Breitbart overall. A lot of places have seen these ad revenue boycotts. Fox News sees them all the time. Sleeping Giants is really good at getting people involved and kind of pointing out, these people are advertising on your platform and this is what they have to say, or, letting people know where their advertising is actually showing up. So they saw a 90% loss of advertising in May of 2017, which was just 3 months into their boycott.
So Lindsay, there's a couple of different phenomena here, but let's first address the thing that I think if you're a logical person comes screaming out of that fact, which is, wait, how are they still in business?
That's a really good question. What's really interesting to me is that they actually have right now job openings listed on their website. They still have enough revenue to be saying we're looking to hire investigative reporters. We're looking to do a little bit more digging on the topics that matter to us. They still are sending reporters out. I was just recently at the Detroit debate and I saw reporters from Breitbart out there, doing their thing, scrumming with the rest of us. So it's not like they're completely destitute at this time. That's not the case at all. They've still got a lot of revenue. They've still got a lot of traffic. It's just that they're sharing that traffic with a wider number of competitors.
Yeah, no, look, I know digital media and their traffic is not nearly enough to sustain that business. No way, no how, no chance. So that leads to me an even more interesting phenomenon. That if you're in media and you're, a standard media operation, CNN, New York Times, etc., you have your certain source of revenue, whether it's subscription for New York Times, the cable fees that people pay for CNN and the advertising, etc. That's normal and it's very understandable how they make their money. And even so, most of those media companies are in trouble. I don't mean CNN and New York Times, but I certainly mean the smaller newspapers and a lot of the smaller cable channels. If you're on the left wing, God help you, there's nobody coming to the rescue. It's just whatever you got from your audience and advertise. For the right wing, if you lose not only 90% of your advertising because of the boycott, but you lost 72% of your actual audience, there's no business that can sustain that over any period of time. So it's got to be right-wing donors that are keeping them afloat. So what's your take on that, Lindsay?
I remember when I was looking into the research for this article, I saw something that Steve Bannon himself said in a film in 2018, where he said that 90% of right-wing websites are going to be completely donor-based going forward, and he doesn't see a path for any partisan media that isn't completely donor-based except for Fox News. But even that, they lost the Mercers after what he said in the Michael Wolff book about Donald Trump, so they keep losing backers, but his idea, his thinking, and as someone who understands the inner workings of Breitbart, is that donors will continue to give to the conservative websites.
Well, of course they will. So let me explain that phenomenon to people. So look, there are people who care about issues that give to nonprofits on the left and the right. So the ones on the left are almost purely, not completely, but Clinton Foundation. But outside of that are largely really to help people, whether it's on political issues they care about like the environment or just to help with cancer, et cetera. On the right wing, there's plenty of people who do help with cancer, the arts, and do great charity. There's also people who give to politics for selfish reasons, because they want the tax cuts, right? Today, Bernie Sanders' team put out a tweet about how the Walton family will get taxed like $147 billion under Bernie Sanders' plan, just on the estate tax alone. The Koch brothers will lose about $96 billion. If you got $96 billion on the line, what difference does it make to give 10 or 20 million to propaganda outlets like Breitbart? So, Lindsay, I'm curious if the rest of the media understands this phenomenon. Like, we know that the right wing is propped up, again, outside of Fox News, and I can get into that interesting example too, but is completely backed up by right wing billionaires for the sole purpose of propaganda. I still feel like that a lot of the media is in total denial over that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to come to terms with that, especially I think for people on the left side who, like you've said, struggle to get that sort of same amount of donation, that same amount of rah-rah on the other side. And I think also people in corporate media, the people who spend a lot of their time reporting on these things, who look at these things, that's not something that makes a lot of sense to them either. I've worked in corporate media too, and the idea of being funded by a donor, being beholden to a donor, or having an agenda-based content model that has something to do with the people who are funding it is kind of foreign to those people. Not entirely, because there's still advertisements and they always have to be a little bit careful about what they're saying in any given block, given what could be coming up in the commercial after that. But it's a whole different ballgame when you're dealing with these smaller partisan places. And I think there's a huge disconnect between the left, the right, and the corporate media.
Yeah, and I don't want people to get mistaken in terms of what it means to be a donor. So if there's someone investing, so the Mercers originally invested into Breitbart, thinking that it would be a good investment, plus for, in their case, propaganda. Now, what was that, Lindsay?
It was.
Yeah, initially they had good traffic, as your article points out. And so whether we agree or disagree with them, they had plenty of traffic in the beginning. And which gets me to Fox News. Rupert Murdoch lost about $500 million on Fox News before it turned a profit. So he put in about $90 million a year that he burned for 5 straight years, $450 million before Fox became profitable. Now, that is really bold vision, but that was an investment. It wasn't a donation, and it paid off for him because now Fox makes billions of dollars. That's normal capitalism. But for a lot of these, especially the digital media outlets, I know digital media, there's no way they're making money. No way. I mean, you see cuts on Vice, HuffPost, you name any digital media company that has had hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, and they're making cuts because they can't sustain it. And they haven't had a 72% drop in audience. They haven't had a 90% drop in revenue. And I think, Lindsay, it's important, and I wonder if there's any movement afoot at all, or maybe your article is the one that begins to kick it off, about some truth in advertising. So for the rest of the media to go, okay, but Breitbart is not propped up by investments, they're propped up by donors. So that's a different animal altogether. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't. 100%. Yeah, I don't see it yet. I feel like even the Obama administration had the Daily Caller in their White House press room. So there's this disconnect between the right wing being paid to say certain things and the rest of the media doing their best with a lot of different problems and biases and perspectives, et cetera. But so far, I don't see that distinction. Do you see that distinction that the rest of the media is making, or no?
No, I don't see that distinction in the rest of the media, and I definitely don't see that distinction in consumers. And I think it would be important, just as important, if consumers had a little bit more of an understanding of the way that the funding worked too.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if they went to a subscription model, for example, and there was a lot of right-wing people who I don't agree with, that I would probably call deplorable, if you will, and they had enough money to sustain it, well then okay, it's a free country, you write what you want, and you got people who will back you on it. But when you just have these giant donors just give you money for propaganda, for tax cuts, people should at least know what your motivation is. So Lindsay, with a really interesting and important article, about Breitbart in this context. Everybody check it out at the wrap, and obviously we'll have a link down to it if you're watching this later on YouTube or Facebook. Lindsay Ellefson, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.